You're listening to the podcast Coffee with Mike and Julie, Libertarians Talk Psychology. This is current commentary from an MBA businessman and a PhD psychologist.
Look what they done to my song, Ma.
I want to talk about rednecks. I've commented to you that I've been working with rednecks for a couple of years now, and I see some neat, interesting things about rednecks. And lately we've been watching Downton Abbey, and it's kind of interesting to watch the social fabric of what Downton Abbey. The
class distinctions.
Yeah, class distinctions.
Yeah, Downton Abbey is very interesting because of the rigid class distinctions.
Right. But you were asking me, what am I trying to accomplish? So I'm going to go ahead and say that up front. That I have this basic idea where I distinguish between institutional discrimination from, say, government policies,
yeah,
and cultural discrimination from individuals. And I believe that you have to get rid of the institutional discrimination before you can even hope to get cultural discrimination to evolve.
Well, that'd be on the face true. I mean, when you have institutionalized discrimination, you've got serious problems with power, abuse of power.
Right.
But when you have individual, and I'm not even sure we ought to use the word discrimination between individuals. Individuals select people they want to associate with, and they have a right to do that to some degree. But this winds up in courts. It's like the bakers. Let's see, the discrimination against the gay individuals by the baker that didn't want to cook the wedding cake for that. I mean, that kind of stuff is rampant in human beings. We're all discriminating all the time on some basis or another.
Right. So before we get too far down the road of how discrimination occurs and the difference between institutional discrimination and cultural discrimination, I want to go back to the topic of rednecks.
Now, these rednecks being poor whites, and usually in the South.
Right. So here's the definition of a redneck. Derogatory term chiefly, but not exclusively, applied to white Americans perceived to be crass and unsophisticated, closely associated with rural whites of the southern U.S.
Oh, there you go. That's a good definition.
Good definition, and I don't really think it's a fair definition.
Well, it seems pretty factual.
It's factual about what we normally laugh about when we use the term redneck.
You think it's too much of a stereotype?
Yeah, it's the crass and unsophisticated and close.
I think the crass is wrong. They're not crass usually.
But I don't mind that part.
Oh, you don't mind that part?
What I mind is the negative connotation that goes with it. Let's see, another one is continuation of the definition is who is believed to have prejudiced ideas and beliefs. This word is usually considered offensive. People from the white South sometimes jocularly call themselves rednecks as inside humor. So it's kind of an interesting term that white people in the South will consider it a joke and talk about.
Would be like
traits.
Without any derogatory terms, it's lower socioeconomic level whites that are probably working class,
right,
associated often with rural, because the term redneck comes from you burn the back of your neck because you're out in the field. Yeah, which is an honorable thing to be doing.
Exactly. In fact, I'm glad you used the word honorable, because that is what I'm seeing in today's rednecks. Now, I gotta say, I'm 70 years old. I grew up during a time in the deep South, Louisiana, where there was huge racism, and it did seem to be especially concentrated or especially true about rednecks that I knew. But you know, that has evolved.
It's different now. It's 50 years later.
I do not.
It's half a century later.
Sometime in the 1980s, the Civil Rights Act was the 1964. Well, a generation after that, the 1980s, I think in general we hit, and I'm talking about the Deep South, and I'm conceding that you and I are both white, educated Southerners.
So-called educated.
Well, we can get into that
Lincoln would say, educated, so-called.
Yeah, right. Well, we can get into that too, as to just how educated are you if you have a college degree.
It's like LSU men go in dumb, come out dumb too.
Yeah, then
Randy Newman hitting it on the head.
Well, I'm going to include the Rednecks, an excerpt from the Rednecks song.
Yeah, well, be careful what you include.
Oh, don't worry. The N word will not be in there.
Yeah.
But I'm just making the point that there are a lot of admirable traits with today's redneck. Once the rednecks evolved and accepted that discrimination, unfair discrimination, was a bad thing, and as far as I'm concerned, that happened in the 80s. We haven't had...
you and I question the evidence that
right.
In general, the lower socioeconomic whites discriminate in any significant group unfair way against the blacks.
Well, I'm glad you said it like that, because I have an interesting little clip here from a Morgan Freeman interview by Don Lemon. So here that is.
Because I thought what you said was fascinating, because you called it bull when you said people can't, pull themselves up. Do you think that race plays a part in wealth distribution, or either a mindset that you can't
today?
Or cannot? Yeah.
No.
You don't?
No, I don't. Hey, you and I, we're proof. Why would race have anything to do with it? Put your mind to what you want to do and go for that.
Now, here's the thing, that in the 60s, the lower socioeconomic whites absolutely did abuse the rights of blacks. And
I remember it well.
Yeah, and the way to think about that is, I heard somebody say it is like we have to be superior to somebody.
Well,
so we're looking at primates trying to order themselves, and on Downton Abbey.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up Downton Abbey, because they had a huge need to differentiate all kinds of class distinctions.
Well, it's so interesting because the episode we're watching now, there's Mosley, who was a butler.
Yeah. And
Carson is offered him a job as a footman, a second footman. He's like, I can't accept being Of course, you and I, we're like, what's the difference, really? You're a servant. I can't be a footman. I've been a butler. I can't go that far down. And we're thinking, what's the difference, really? Because we have no understanding of English aristocracy.
But I'm saying that's kind of a redneck trait. Rednecks, to them, if it's work, it's work. They don't get into social class distinctions very much when it comes to... Well,
in other words, these two cultures are very different.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's, that article that I reviewed in one of our podcasts about the changing values over the last 40 or 50 years. Mm-hmm. There's something called the Victorian bargain that is gone away. And that applied to poor whites in the South, that you could be poor and honorable.
Right.
So I think this applies to your discussion about what is it to be a redneck.
Right.
Of course, that reminds me of who's the comedian, Jeff Jeff
Foxworthy.
Foxworthy, like, you know, you're
You
a redneck.
might be a redneck.
You might be a redneck if, and you know, what the car on the blocks in the front yard.
And there are a lot of comedians that do a lot of work with rednecks, and it's funny.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
funny,
It is
and
hilarious.
And rednecks are the first ones to laugh about it.
Yeah.
They laugh at themselves and at the stereotype, and it's hilarious. And in fact, I'm still saying I'm going to play part of that song.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to follow up on the Victorian bargain, where they found that has gone away, and that was, it's okay to be poor as long as you have dignity and honor. And it kind of came from maybe the religious values. So that has gone away, and now the research on values says, you know, what makes you good is money. And so that is a heartbreaking change, where honor no longer makes you good, but money makes you good. And that leaves a lot of rednecks out, because redneck by definition is the poor working class.
That's true, but they're still proud.
Well, the ones let's face it, where we live right now is kind of lost in time. We're not in a very modern area. When you say we're living in the rural South.
Yeah, but
so you're running.
I claim these redneck traits are all over the place, north, south. I don't know about the West.
Well, that's a question that we don't really know, but where we are, we find rednecks who have lots of honor and dignity.
Have a lot of honor and dignity. In working construction with these guys, you know, I kind of have this policy: when you get halfway through your job, I'm paying you a lump sum to do a job. When you get halfway through it, let's talk about it again and see if you need to increase your fee. Man, once they say what that fee is going to be, and even though I come back and say, hey, it's okay now to increase your fee if you think that's what's fair, I mean, they're too proud.
They have
too proud to go
dignity.
up on their fee, and I can tell that they did not estimate correctly how much that was going to cost. And I'm open to giving them more money, but we got to, you know, I want to do it now.
Yeah, because you would do that in the engineering business. You would go back and renegotiate a fee with your industrial client.
That's right.
Well, you know, that is really a good example. It's like, no, the redneck says, I estimated the fee, I'm going to stick with it. A deal is a deal.
A deal is a deal.
Out of pure pride.
Right. Now, let me say this. I want to say one little observation. As a Southern white male growing up and rubbing elbows with rednecks my whole life, I want to say my little indicator of when things changed, of when the redneck culture accepted that unfair discrimination was a bad thing.
Sports.
What's that?
Sports.
Well, sports was one. And in fact, let me go ahead and say that when I started LSU, and I was at the training table at LSU, and we had all the sports: football, basketball, track. You know, I was on the swimming team. There were 2 black people in the entire, must have been 200 athletes.
Really? This would be what, 1969. 69.
There were 2 black athletes at the training table. Now, I think there were some athletes who did not have food scholarships. There may have been a couple more, but there were only 2 at the training table. By the time I finished LSU, and let me say that evolved. The next year we had more, and the black athletes all sat at the black tables, and the white athletes sat at the white tables. But I'm going to tell you, it was more of a black thing. The white athletes, if you have a team member who is black, that goes away. That is your team member.
Well, for example, or to clarify, is that when you're in athletics, it's performance that you judge people by, not the color of their skin.
That's right. I mean, you appreciate that guy's performance.
Yeah, it's pure pure job performance.
But by the time I left LSU, there were not only a lot more black at the training table, but blacks and whites were sitting at the same table. It was not that big a deal.
So over the course
now,
of
this is
4 years? 4 years?
Yeah, 4 years. Mm-hmm. And I'm telling you, in athletics, which is the way we should have introduced, the combining of the races, because in athletics, those guys got it straight. That guy is my team member. And then I got to see it at the high school level also. So, but when I knew that times had changed, because it used to be when you got in a room with rednecks, there was always one guy who it was almost you just couldn't control the guy.
Hostility.
He wanted to talk about.
There was one loudmouth bigot somewhere.
There was one loudmouth bigot, and we were always uncomfortable with but we didn't really shut him up.
Yeah.
We just put up with
him.
We put up with it, or we left the room, or whatever. By the mid-1980s, those guys, couldn't speak up anymore. Now, they may have existed. There may have been, but they were so socially out of it that they did not speak up anymore. Yeah. You couldn't, a guy couldn't just rant and rave like he could in the old days.
Well, that, just to add to your thinking about that was also the same time period of the women's movement. And there was always some jackass man that would make some derogatory comment or act in an inappropriate way toward women. And it was all the same movement. It's like the entitlement of the American white male was put in a harness. It was like, no, stop making sure we know you're dominant. Shut the hell up.
So I want to play the Randy Newman song right now, because I'm afraid we're getting too far away from it and I'll lose the opportunity. So
Randy Newman, a poet, philosopher, and singer-songwriter.
But then when I get back from that, I want to talk about the EEOC's different forms of discrimination. So here's the Randy Newman song.
Talk real funny down here. Drink too much, we laugh too loud. We too dumb to make it in no northern town. We keeping the down. We got no neck or men from Texas. Good old boys from Tennessee. College men from LSU. When in dumb, come out dumb too. Hustling around Atlanta in their alligator shoes. Getting drunk every weekend at the barbecue. We keep it down. We're rednecks. We're rednecks. We don't know our ass from a hole in the ground. We're rednecks. We're rednecks. We're keeping it down. Now you know the Negro. See, he's got his dignity. Down here way too ignorant to realize the North is set free. Yes, it's free to be put in a cage in Harlem, New York City. It's free to be put in a cage on the south side of Chicago, on the west side. It's free to be put in a cage in Huffy, Cleveland. It's free to be put in a cage in East St. Louis. And it's free to be put in a cage in Fillmore and San Francisco. It's free to be put in a cage in Roxbury and Boston. They're gathering the money from miles around.
So just one little comment about the Randy Newman song is that it's really a deep song because it not only does a great job ridiculing rednecks and brings up discrimination. it also brings up institutional discrimination across the entire country.
Well, the song is about hypocrisy.
That's right.
You know, well, the song is an art form about whatever you think it's about, and let's just make sure that we identify this is philosophical irony and sarcasm. The song is you remember when people misunderstood Randy Newman's short people, and people got upset because they thought it was a message about short people not being okay?
Yeah.
Of course, Ally McBeal used short people in one of those episodes. It was great. There was a guy that died, and at the funeral they play gospel choir with this fabulous black singer. Don't want no short people around there. It was Richard Fish's uncle or something, and he didn't like short people. It was a hilarious episode, and it was so well done.
However, I'm going to mention the different forms of discrimination, and they don't list short people in here, but I want to tell you.
Well, remember Monty Python on how tall is he?
Absolutely.
He is so tall.
You know, it is a joke to say there isn't discrimination based on height. I mean, I've been in the working world, and there is absolutely discrimination based on height. Now, you may not verbalize it very well, but
there's discrimination based on height, by beauty. Probably you've claimed hair color, which I don't really believe.
I kind of jokingly say that, but I still say there's a little bit about us redheads.
Well, this show we watched recently has played fun of the discrimination against blonde women. Legally Blonde is a great movie on the discrimination against blonde women. Remember all the blonde jokes?
Oh yeah.
I mean, there was a whole slew of dumb blonde jokes.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll just go through these real quick. EEOC, discrimination by type. There are legal consequences if you discriminate against by age for anyone over age 40. Disability, equal pay, that's between men and women basically. Genetic information, I didn't know about that one.
It's new, I guess.
Harassment, national origin, pregnancy. Now that one's interesting because we have a little history of you getting a job when you were pregnant and then feeling a little bad about the place where you were.
Yeah, I got a job at Honeywell, and I kept my pregnancy secret. And then my manager said, "I'm glad you didn't tell me." I felt guilty for not telling her, and she said, "I'm so glad you didn't tell me."
Yeah.
Because she is a very, very insightful person.
And they very much value you as an employee. But if they had known you were pregnant, they wouldn't have hired you.
Well, I don't know that that's the case, but it would have put her in a difficult position.
Yeah. But the rest of them are race and color, religion, retaliation, sex. Okay, a lot of these are overlapping. Sexual harassment, sexual orientation, and gender identity.
So from a libertarian standpoint, and from the EEOC, which I think affects all government agencies, you can't discriminate against people, anybody, on matters that don't have to do with the job performance.
Right. I wish they had made it that simple, but yeah.
I mean, they could just say that on anything that has nothing to do with the job performance. And that's what a libertarian thinks about. Now, reverse discrimination, I mean, we should probably talk about the reverse discrimination, because the country seems to be in a reverse discrimination mode, giving special treatment to people on that list.
Well, now we're getting into what I consider to be institutional discrimination.
And reverse discrimination.
Which is reverse discrimination. And some institution tries to make up for the past or make up for whatever by instituting some rule.
Okay, so let me say that this is a good distinction for libertarians. Discrimination based on things like skin color or sex is really unfair and stupid, and we have laws against that. Reverse discrimination is when you take that too far and discriminate against the other group and being unfair and turn turned the idea of fairness into unfairness through a social game. So this was when the rescuers get all high and mighty and continue to rescue people and be unfair to others. So the EEOC, when I was working in this area of selection for industry, the EEOC was real clear, and it came down to this direction from the EEOC. You cannot be unfair to one group trying to be fair to another group. And that's a great statement about reverse discrimination becoming a game. Trying to be fair to one group, you cannot screw over another group.
Yeah.
You have to find a way that walks that chalk line. And that sometimes is more complex than people want it to be.
Mm-hmm. The way I would like to distinguish it or look at it is I would prefer if we as problem solvers look at it from the institutional standpoint. And some institutional things that we have, our police state has adverse impact on poor people and black people. Our education system, where we make people go to a school in their neighborhood and don't allow them to have a choice with a voucher system. And those very people are, those minority people, they want a voucher system. They want to be able to pick a school for their kids. And they can't do that. That's institutional discrimination as far as I know. The war on drugs. In the first place, it's non-libertarian to throw someone in jail for
victimless crime.
But that crime, the war on drugs, adversely impacts poor black people more than anybody else. So I'm pointing out these institutional things, and in the political discourse, we never try to fix the institutional stuff. We're trying to fix the way people think and talk, instead of trying to fix the real regulations that make big differences in our population.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, stop trying to change people's thoughts. Stop trying to do thought control and fix the process in the design that you've screwed up. The people have screwed it up. I guess these things are screwed up. I mean, I haven't studied any of the things particularly closely, but every time I do study governmental design, I'm horrified by it. And one thing that's happened recently is we're in a chaotic stage of looking at all kinds of systems, that aren't working, that aren't even close to working. Like the medical system is the one that I keep being confronted with daily. It's like it's a system with a purpose of making money for hospitals and pharmaceutical companies and some kind of organized political system, and it doesn't meet the needs of anybody in the damn country.
Well, and that's one too. Obamacare was supposed to help poor people. Well, we still have basically the same number of uncovered people, and it's basically poor black people who can't, if I understand the problem,
well, I mean,
who can't get covered.
Well, I mean,
I'm
not sure that's correct, but there's a gap of people. There's the working class that is in the gap. There are all kinds of things wrong with it. The Medicaid expansion did cover the lower socioeconomic groups, but then there's the working class that is in the gap. I mean, it's just diabolical when you think about it, but here's the point I want to make. There was one study that showed it didn't matter. Your health outcomes don't relate to whether you have coverage or not.
Yeah.
There's another study that was very dramatic, was showing that when you get all the medical specialists out of the picture for the weekend, people survive better.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these indicators that the more medical care you have, the worse your health outcomes. This is mounting up. This is mounting up for everybody. I mean, the evidence is mounting up in this area that the system is so broken that really there's just no way to fix it.
Well, So I might be wrong about adverse impact when it comes to the medical world, but I'm suspicious that with the government being so involved in the medical world, there's bound to be adverse impact. And that's a term you've used to show adverse impact. I want to conclude with the phrase adverse impact. But maybe you should define it real quick. No? Okay.
I can define it better than you can define it.
Well, okay.
So the adverse impact is where some selection hurdle has an impact based on skin color or sex or some kind of unrelated variable, and that then the outcomes are skewed by the unrelated variable, so that it's adverse to a group of people for no logical reason or valid reason.
So I want to conclude this episode by saying we have a logical obligation to address institutional discrimination first by looking at adverse impact.
Mm-hmm.
Every government program should be investigated for adverse impact. And if there is adverse impact, they need to try to fix it.
Yeah.
And steer away from cultural discrimination.
Steer away from thought control.
Thought control, because it's my belief that if we can minimize the institutional discrimination, the cultural discrimination will follow automatically.
I like that conclusion, and I will say in Ron Paul's term is that, let's mind our own business. Stop the thought control and focus on the damn job of minimizing institutional discrimination.
That sounds good to me.